Hi, it's Ruth.
And it's Sandi.
Sandy's lived in Altadena for years, deeply rooted in its history and dedicated to its sustainability. I'm new to this place, but I've been completely taken by its spirit, its creativity, its sense of belonging, and the resilience that rose from the Eaton fire.
The fire changed everything. Many want to rebuild the Altadena that was. But what we've learned is that rebuilding isn't just about structures, it's about people, stories, and hope.
Altadena is a quilt of many patches, diverse, imperfect, and beautiful. Together, we're stitching something new from what remains.
This podcast is about those threads, the stories of the people who faced loss and found purpose, who hold the past close but keep stepping towards the future.
These are the voices of Altadena.
This is Footprints from the Foothills.
Hi, everyone. It's Ruth. And
Sandi.
here we are with Mike Regan, who Sandy and I met on a walk through an Altadena neighborhood. He and his wife were walking and they were so friendly. They started talking to us about Altadena and the Eaton Canyon. And he was wearing, I believe, a t-shirt that said Eaton Canyon Nature Preserve. And I said, hey, we started this podcast and want to tell stories of hope and inspiration from Altadena. I said, and he said, oh, I don't think I have a story. And I think, well, I said, I think you do. And so I asked him some questions, and now I'm about to do the same thing so that he can share his story with you. So, Mike, welcome. And tell us about yourself. What brought you here to Altadena? What connection you still have to Altadena?
Sure. Thanks, Ruth. Thanks for having me here. I appreciate it. My wife and I moved to Los Angeles County back in 1994 from the Inland Empire, and we had lived along the San Gabriel Mountains. The San Bernardino Mountains out in Highland, California. And we're both from the Midwest. And while we really enjoyed the Inland Empire, when we had to move to Los Angeles County, my wife had stopped into the town of Pasadena for work one day. And she called me and she said, I was in Pasadena, and Pasadena looks like the towns we grew up in the Midwest. Pasadena had an old downtown with brick buildings, and there were full mature oak trees and all these beautiful homes that were built, in the late 1800s and early 20th century. So I had stopped off on my way to my job, and I just went to an open house that was, I think it was up in Sierra Madre, and I met a real estate agent there. And so from that relationship, we started looking for homes in Pasadena first, and that's where we moved. We moved to Pasadena and loved our 1932 style home with the big trees in the yard and all of that. And at the time, living along the mountains in San Bernardino, we wanted that same thing for ourselves here in LA County. And Pasadena provided that with the San Gabriel Mountains because we had two like very energetic sporting dogs. And those dogs really needed a lot of exercise. So Ann and I started walking every morning with the dogs up into Eaton Canyon and going up to Henniger Flats and getting the dogs exercise and ourselves exercise at the same time. And so one of the things we noticed that happens when you're up on the trails here is that you will see someone that maybe you've seen them a few times now because you're walking the same trails. And maybe in those early passings, you would wave or say good morning very casually. And then after a few months, you realize that you're seeing these same people. And if you get to a viewpoint or if you get to Henniger Flats and you find yourself standing alongside this person, taking some water or enjoying the view, a conversation starts. And from there, it leads to more. And after a year or two, you find that you're having Thanksgiving dinner with this person that you met in the hills. And I can tell you that today, all of my friends that live in Pasadena and Altadena, I've met in the mountains, either Henniger Flats, Brown Mountain, all the trails around. So that has deep meaning for my wife and I, the people that we met on the trails. So Ann and I began picking up garbage in the canyon, and we found out that there was a nature center there, Eaton Canyon Nature Center. And we thought, well, we enjoy the mountains so much. Why don't we see if we can be volunteers there? So we ended up going through their docent training program. And from that, it led to different volunteer opportunities. We both worked the gift shop where we were kind of the hosts of the nature center on a Saturday morning. I was in charge of graffiti removal from the nature center all the way to the waterfall. I ran a program called the Twilight Program, where we had on Saturday evenings during the summer a guest speaker to come in and talk about anything nature from outside organizations like the Animal Guys or JPL, what they were doing with astronomy, or Native Americans, and the Altadena Mountain Rescue Team would come in and talk about what they did. And so Ann and I were really heavily involved in the Nature Center. And I believe we're in our 19th year of being volunteers there. So knowing this, that same realtor that sold us our house in Pasadena told us that there was a home for sale on Eaton Canyon in Altadena. And that was back in 2001. And so that was a dream. We bought that house, and now we didn't have to get into our cars to go to the nature center. We could walk down to the Midwick entrance to the canyon and walk to the nature center and do our volunteer work and continue to hike in the mountain trails. And again, all the relationships that we built from both the nature center advocates and volunteers, as well as just passersby in the canyons. And so that was what was really special about Altadena and the mountains and the trails and the way it brought us together with the community. And then on top of that, all the volunteering work. So, the nature center burnt down in the fire, and we've been to a few meetings, and they are getting some volunteers together now and doing some plant work around the areas where the nature center previously stood. And they're hoping to open that up in some form to the public, possibly in January of 2026.
Oh, wonderful.
That's
great. That's very encouraging, very encouraging. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. They're moving forward. They plan to rebuild, and like our homes, that'll take some years to do, but the plans are there. And so in the meantime, I think I was telling you about the trail work that we do in the mountains. I'm part of the Lowelifes Respectable Citizens Club, and the Lowlifes are named after Mount Low here, right, in the backdrop of our mountains. And we go in and we repair the trails after floods and fires. So I've had the opportunity, even though those areas are closed, to go up and do that work. We just were working on the Idle Hour Trail. For those of you who are listening, who know the mountains, we worked on that this past weekend, and we had 25 volunteers up there trying to rebuild the trails that have been washed out because of the lack of vegetation up in the hills, and then the rains come. So
do you need more people to help with that rebuilding effort, or
we do, absolutely. You can look up the Lowlifes Respectable Citizens Club on Instagram, or probably just Google it, and you'll find ways to make contact. And then
and that's LOWE, correct?
LOWE, yes.
Awesome.
Yeah, and there will be some orientation on there and some pictures and descriptions of what we do and when we do it. And if you sign up, you'll get an email notification of all the upcoming volunteer opportunities, and you can either say yay or nay, or do as much of it as you want or as little of it as you want. So yeah,
that's fantastic. That's fantastic. So you live right on the canyon. So where were you when the Eaton fire began?
So, the electric company had turned off our electricity, I think around noon or 2 p.m. that day. I was going out to pick up some carryout for Ann and I left the house around 5:45, and I drove down to Pasadena and picked up some food. And as I was driving home, I got to around Allen Street and New York Drive when my phone rang, and it was my next door neighbor, Kelly. And she said, "Mike, the mountain behind the house is on fire. The fire began about 600 yards, I would say, from our house. And that
Oh,
phone call
wow.
came to me maybe at 6:10 or 6:15. And so I said, thanks, Kelly. And I hung up the phone and, kind of got home as quickly as I could. And as I was pulling into my driveway off of Altadena Drive, a police officer was running up the street and he stopped me and he said, "You have to leave the area." And I said, my house is right there. I was right by my driveway. And he said, "Okay, you have 10 minutes to get whatever you need
Oh,
and get out." And so at this point, when I got home, the fire was about halfway from that tower where it began down to the bottom of Eaton Canyon. And the odd kind of, I guess, benefit of it was that the power had been off in the house because the fire was now down low enough to be parallel to our house across the canyon. The entire house was lit up with this orange light, right? The fire was
oh
burning, the
my.
wind was blowing. And, in my head, I wondered if the police officer was correct. Do I have 10 minutes? Do I have 20 minutes or do I have 7 minutes? Because once the smoke would come in, you're probably lost at that point. You'd be overtaken. So that's running through my head. And I just thought I have a dog. And so I have an old dog. So I ran in and I got the dog and I have a classic car, a classic truck in the garage. And I thought, you know what, what's the most expensive vehicle I have? And so let's take the Bronco. And I threw the dog into the Bronco and got the Bronco out of the garage. And then my wife pulled in and she ran into the house and her eyes were about the size of dish plates. I mean, she was like, an
Mm.
expletive. What's going on? I said, we've got about 5 minutes to get out of here. So she was able to grab 3 photos off of the walls and she grabbed some turquoise and silver a jewelry set that I got her for our 25th wedding anniversary. And she got a jacket and some jeans and her computer and we ran out. And that was it. We went over to the safe part of Altadena because that real estate agent who sold us the house in Pasadena and then sold us the house in Altadena has remained our friend ever since we met him that
Nice.
first day. I'm
That's
sitting
nice.
in his duplex. We were in a hotel for a while. We lost everything. So
Sorry.
yeah.
So what did you take besides the dog in the truck?
What else did I take? When I ran into the house and got the dog and the car out, I still had some time. And so I ran in and I grabbed something of value. And I don't even know what it was at this point, but as I was running out of the house and I got to the doorway, I set it down and I thought, no, there's something more valuable. Go leave that alone. And I went back and I grabbed something else. And again, I don't even remember what that was. And I got to the doorway again and I decided that that wasn't what I should be saving. And after I did that twice, I
Mm.
kind of dawned on me, okay, you are not thinking correctly right now. So what do you really need to survive maybe 24 hours? And I thought my computer. So we have a guest house out back. It was my home office. I ran out and grabbed a knapsack and I put my computer in it and the power cord and that was it. And then it was time to go.
Those computers
Yes.
kind of our lifeline to
I thought about
friends, family.
communication.
Yeah.
I thought what's
Yeah.
going to be important, and I did grab a blanket and a pillow because I thought,
Oh,
well,
wow.
we'll maybe be sleeping in our van tonight and we'll come home tomorrow.
Do you think, Mike, the project at Eaton Canyon and the friends that you've made up on the trails and the work that you're doing through Eaton Canyon, has that helped you a lot through this last year in getting through the feelings and frustrations and complexities of dealing with insurance and all those obstacles? Has that helped a lot? Has it been a good distraction? What unexpectedly has been found? We know what's been lost. What's been found in the process for you?
For the friends who lost it all, um, I hate to say that's comforting. I mean, in having the whole town lose everything, it forms community that is going through the same emotional issues at the same time, at the same issues of insurance issues, of what do we do next, of rebuilding, of talking, and just having this whole group of people that are going through the same event. And that can be very helpful. Emotionally, it was great to have the friends who lost share that they were going through the same traumatic experiences and emotional experiences. It was interesting that in the beginning, like maybe the first couple of weeks, with all the calls that I'm sure everyone got from around the world, from their friends and family about what happened, how you doing. And I felt it was nice to share it with them, to get it out, to say it. My house burned down. We lost everything. But then after that went away, after a couple of weeks, like everyone, that I had talked to that was sort of close to me, I became very cautious about sharing with acquaintances. I didn't want to run into people walking our dog in the morning that were just acquaintances and have them come up and hug me. I recoiled at that. It's like there had to be a level of disclosure or a level of a relationship with someone to want to open your heart about this tragedy. And so then for a lot of months I felt like recoiling, which I did. I kind of avoided events where there would be people that didn't lose their homes. I didn't want the questions anymore. It became a little too hard at some point to keep recounting the story. But that has passed. That has passed. I would say maybe after 6 or 7 months, it felt better to just be like, okay, I'm more whole emotionally, and I don't mind talking about it. It happened, and I think the process of the loss and the tragedy of the fire and kind of the scariness of the fire and going through that. I mean, we literally evacuated like 4 times that night. We came over to Minaroo Street. They got the evacuation notice. We went over to a friend's house over near Fair Oaks and Altadena Drive. We evacuated there at 3 or 4 a.m. after trying to put out bushes with fire hoses and save his house while all the houses on the other side of the street were on fire. And then my wife has a horse, so we had to evacuate the stable and deal with how do we get all these horses out of here. And that happened around 5 a.m. And we would continually that night go back to see if we could get to our neighborhood. And we were following the fire all the way from the east side of town as it made its way west. And we would just pull back and just watch it. And, the different evacuation notices were coming and people were leaving in that manner. There's silver linings to it. And, it's like not owning anything or having any possessions frees up a lot of time. And in the beginning, that time that was unfortunate because you need distractions in the beginning. You just don't want to think about it too much. Living in a smaller space with no responsibility to the space because we are renters. There's silver linings there. There's more time to do things, and you need the time to think about moving forward.
Right.
So do you think that a lot of it's grief? I mean, I don't know what the 12 stages or 10 stages of grief actually are. I mean, I have an idea, but it sounds like what you went through was grief. And part of the reason I think what's very hard is if you are talking to someone who did not lose their house, like Sandi and I, we did not. We only were displaced and had damages or whatever you want to call it. So, maybe you felt like we were superficial. We couldn't possibly understand what you were going through. And you were looking for empathy, but not that kind of, not the kind of empathy that's just exploitive in a way, like, oh, I'm sorry. I mean, it seems to me like when someone tells you what you have just told us, how am I going to say, oh, I'm sorry? Doesn't that, it just seems like superficial and not really enough. How could
I think and from our standpoint, I think also from the opposite end of that thought spectrum, the people that didn't lose their home, we were thinking too, yes, maybe we don't want to engage in conversation because we have survivor's guilt. And
Mhm.
that's hard to understand too, I think, if you haven't been on that side of the spectrum. But so I can understand how some of the conversations were probably very fragmented for a while. And people kind of broke into groups. But what is there a certain act of kindness or community that kind of brought everyone together that stands out in your mind, or personally? Maybe not it doesn't have to be something huge, but people have told us just some simple things like, oh, someone invited me to come into their home that I didn't know and share coffee one night. I mean, it's been kind of some simple little acts of kindness that other people have talked about. Is there anything that maybe stands out in your mind?
There's a lot of little things. We'd be on the property during the period of sifting through the rubble. Um, I'll tell you the biggest one. And the biggest one came from the Army Corps of Engineers.
Oh,
So your house burns down and you're looking at this loss and you're looking at this rubble. And after maybe a few weeks or a month or so, the rubble, you become protective. We became protective of the rubble,
okay.
right? Because that's all we had. All we have is this burned up pile of nothingness, right? And
Interesting.
so that's what we own and that's ours. And don't disrespect it. Someone had come on the property while we were there, like 3 days after the fire, just stopping kind of your looky lures. And we had to say, hey, don't walk onto my property.
Yeah.
Stay, this is our property. This is our home. And so we had to chase a few people away. So back to the Army Corps of Engineers. So it came time for the Army Corps to remove our debris. And when they called us and said, Mr. and Mrs. Regan, can you come over at 2 o'clock and we want to take you through the process that we're going to go through. And so we went over on that particular day, and there were about 8 or 10 of the guys that were operating the heavy machinery and doing all the work. And there was a head guy from the Corps. And he said, Mr. and Mrs. Regan, what we're going to do is we're going to walk the property and we're going to explain the process to you that we're going to take to remove the debris. And we want you to point out anything to us that maybe you don't want us to take, like that outdoor fireplace, for instance, or whatever it is. And he said, we just want to be clear on that so that you can save things that you want and we won't take them. And so he kind of gave us about a 10-minute orientation. And all of those worker gentlemen were standing behind us, and Ann and I were facing the head guy. And he said, okay, let's begin now. And he turned around and walked over to the corner of the property where he was going to begin. And Ann and I hadn't taken a step forward yet, but I noticed that the guys behind us didn't move. And I thought that was interesting. And so when Ann and I started to walk over to the head gentleman, then the workers followed us. And none of them were talking to one another. They were completely silent. And so we went through the property, took about 30 minutes to get everything done and to figure out what they were going to do. And then that gentleman left. And the other gentlemen were over by the roadside. And I thought they were going to get started that day with the demolition. And Ann and I were just kind of, again, we had this tie to the rubble and we knew it was going to go away. And so we were, I guess, taking our last look at it.
Mhm.
And then we left the property. And as I was leaving the property out by the street, I said to the guys, the workers, I said, oh, I thought you guys were going to get started today with the work. And they said, yes, we are, but we're just waiting for you and your wife to leave the property. And so I thought that was really respectful.
Yeah.
They didn't want to get started, give us our time to kind of say goodbye to everything that we had. And so that was neat.
Wow.
That made me feel really good.
Very moving. I mean,
That's a very, very vivid description too. I mean, that helps people really feel like you're there. And thank you for sharing.
And to go back to the part about people wanting to say they're sorry, that was all accepted very, very, very well. We know you're sorry. Thank you for saying that. But I think what made that so difficult was that I was almost ashamed that I had no idea what people in hurricanes, fires,
Yeah.
tornadoes, floods
Yeah.
that lose everything. I had no idea
Right.
of the emotional toll, of the complete redirection of your life for
Yes.
probably 3 to 5 years,
Yes.
and the dealing with that. And we it's just my wife and I, and we don't have 3 children and 2 dogs and living in a hotel room on the 4th floor of some downtown area.
We
Those
did that.
people are struggling. I mean, we've got it good. And I can't even imagine what that is like. And
I
it's not
know from
everybody's experience is different, but I can now truly empathize with what they're going through. And
So it's kind of
I know,
widened our circle of community in some aspects because yes, now we can feel some sense of bonds with other people in other parts of the country or even other parts of the world when they've gone through something as devastating.
I found
I
it,
think I think that I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I found it interesting in probably the first month or two after the fire. You'd be in a grocery store or you'd be walking. We were in downtown Pasadena where we were living, and I could recognize people who lost everything. You
Yes.
know, I,
Look on their
I could
face.
just see it in their shoulders, in their posture. And, it
Yes.
was, that was interesting. And I don't see that anymore, which is great, which is good, right? Everybody's kind of
Well, I
hopefully
think it's
getting to a
um
better place. I mean,
We're in
those
recovery.
first 6 months were pretty rough. So
yeah, time does heal things. If this has no other lesson to the world, is at least to be able to understand other people's situations, their grief, their hopes, their dreams, how things can get shattered and changed really in an instant. I mean, I know my nephew who doesn't live here. He lives in Illinois, and so he was saying to me, he said, "I really don't have any concept of what this is like." And so I went my street. There's only a couple of houses that didn't make it, but the next block across Lincoln, nothing survived. So I took a video of that block and showed him, this is the reality. This is what people have as their home. These are places people were walking their dog, having parties, having company, having family events, cooking dinner, whatever, coming home from the hard day and seeking the solace that that brings. And, when that's gone, it's devastating.
Mike, are you rebuilding in the same location or have you decided on that? Or what are you reimagining now as you move forward?
yeah, so we're in the stage of working with an architect. We haven't come to the conclusion that we can afford to rebuild yet, but working with the architect and the contractor that we have, we needed a geotech engineer because we live on the slope of Eaton Canyon. So there were a
Yeah.
few hoops we had to jump through in order to prove that the property was stable enough to rebuild on. But when we get like a preliminary drawing, an idea from the architect that fits within our budget, and we look at that and say, yes, that's satisfactory. Let's go forward. Or it would be, that property. It's a kind of a special property. It has an unobstructed view of the canyon and the mountains. You can hear the stream running, and so
Yeah.
you kind of I feel this like obligation to the land to
Yeah.
redo it in a way that respects the land and takes into consideration all the benefits of that piece of property. So, and I think that's going to be a yes. I think the architect thinks that they can do it for us. So, we should
I
know
hope so.
that in probably 3 to 4 months from now. if we're moving forward. But I think it's pretty positive that we are.
Awesome.
That's good. Well, is there anything else you'd like to tell us about this experience and what kind of footprint it has left in your heart and mind after all that you've been through?
You know, the emotional issues that come from this tragedy seem to be, I can see like a linear progression in a good way. But there's peaks and valleys.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure why. You know, I'm not sure why a particular day is a really bad day. I know that therapists have told me that, you know, your life will be defined by pre-fire and post-fire, and that won't
Yeah.
go away. I think there's a like kind of an overarching fear of the future, and again, working with an architect and determining if we can afford to rebuild and rebuilding. I think once we walk into the home that we were able to rebuild, I feel like a lot of that weight or that fear will be shed.
Yeah.
And like I said, it's getting better, but until that day comes, you know, who knows what can happen. You know, people make the wrong decisions in rebuilding a home all the time. You see plenty of homes that are 75% finished and have been sitting there for 5 years. And you wonder, I wonder, what happened? You know, did they run out of money? Did a contractor overstep? Did they get divorced? You know, what happened? And um, so I feel like we're cautious. We're trying to be cautious emotionally, which is not great, you know, like kind of suppressing emotion, and that's good emotion as well.
Kind of a cautious optimism or
Yeah, cautious optimism, I suppose. Yeah. So like if that could happen to us, if what happened to us in January, you know, is any indication of what is
Mm.
possible, what a sort of kick in the teeth that can be. Let's not hope for too much at this point. Let's just take it step by step and hopefully get to the place where our lives are returned to what they were.
I think it's a question of the fundamental thing is wanting to feel safe. I mean, I think that we have, as humans, the need to feel safe, the need to feel secure, and not be, like everything that we know and count on is going to be uprooted. And I don't know how you couldn't feel that way, except for to let time do its magic on you and allow you to live again, really, as you chose.
Yeah, I would say time, and time comes from doing the work, doing the rebuilding, having hopefully the community return to what it was. You know, running into more people out on the trails when they open, and making new friendships like we have every year that we've lived in Altadena, and that will return us to normalcy.
well, it's people like you that do give us hope too, because like we said, we met on a walk and it is nice to start seeing faces again and people with their dogs. And that has always been what has made Altadena special, because people in Altadena don't hesitate to stop and have a conversation.
Right.
And I haven't seen that in many, many other places. It's the friendliness and the willingness to just take a breath and stop and talk with someone.
Sure.
What
Yeah.
do you hope that people remember about Altadena 10 years from now, or even 5 years from now?
Well, I know that they will remember what it was before the fire. You know, on the weekends, our trails were filled with mountain bikers, horseback riders, and hikers. People from all over Los Angeles County would come here, and I hope that returns. It was always wonderful to see hikers walking down Altadena Drive, going to the trailheads, and bicyclists, and maybe they will, hopefully 5 years, maybe a little bit longer, that they will be able to say that has all returned. And even though the landscape looks a little bit different, the heart of Altadena possibly will remain. and that friendliness that you spoke of will flourish.
Yeah.
And we'll go back to the human connection that was always here. So
Well, I can't thank you enough for sharing your story and your heart with us today. It was very special. Very
Thank you so
special.
much, Mike.
good. Sure, you're welcome.
And if people want to volunteer again, the Lowelifes website you gave us, and what about the Eaton Canyon Nature Center? Is that
Yes, you can probably just Google Eaton Canyon Nature Center Associates.
associates? Okay,
Associates, yes.
perfect.
Yeah. We have beautiful trails that are still open on the west side of town. Not enough people are up there. So get out, enjoy the natural beauty of Altadena more often.
Yeah.
And where can they access those trails? What's the best place to access?
The Gabrielino Trail, it starts right behind Jet Propulsion Lab at the
Okay,
end of
great.
Altadena Drive.
That's in my backyard practically. So
Yeah.
I still go there, but you are right. There are very few people there. And thank you so much. And I would say until next time.
Sounds good, Ruth. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.